Good evening, everyone. My name is Meadhbh Murphy. I'm the archivist here in the college. I'm also curator of the exhibition upstairs, Surgeons and Insurgents, so hopefully you've had a bit of time to go around it and have a look. And what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to talk about the connections between surgeons, rebels and the Republic. So I'm going to look a bit at what actually happened here in 1916, but then I'm going to look at further on, because obviously when the Rising ends, it doesn't mean that we're given a republic straight away. It continues on, and the same with the work of the surgeons. That continues on as well into the 1920s and on. So I'm going to have a look at that, but first I'm just going to give you a look at the history of the college. The college itself, between its staff, students, and even its founders, had some rebels in there. Now, be it through their medical and surgical research or their experimental surgical techniques, but also their political beliefs. And the one person I'm going to talk to you about is a man called William Deas. Now, when the college was founded in 1784, he was one of the founding fathers of the college. And you probably would have seen him when you walked in. He's the first statue you see when you come in the front door. And as you can see there, he's a founding member. He was the first professor of surgery. He was the president in 1789. He was a member of the United Irishmen, and he played his part in the 1789 rebellion as well. 1798 rebellion. I'm reading that sideways. And with William Deas, what happened was he was actually here teaching in the college after the rebellion. And a colleague of his came along to him and said that the British Army were now rounding up any members of the United Irishmen they could after the rebellion. And that was kind of giving him a heads up, a warning that he was on the list. So what he decided to do was he went home. He was a surgeon. He slit the femoral artery in his left thigh and he bled to death. So he decided that he'd actually die for his beliefs of being a nationalist and being a United Irishman. So I think when the rebels came in the front door into this college and were greeted by this man, I think they would have realised they were in pretty good company when they came into the college. So that was just to have a look at William Deas, because he's the main guy you see when you come in. And as you might notice again, when you're leaving the college, you might notice that here, do you see this little crack in the marble statue? That is where your artery would be in your thigh. Now, when his great-grandson gave that statue to the college in the 1860s kind of time, there was no crack. So that's gradually appeared over time. So that's one of the porter's lovely haunting stories that they tell children when they come in. I would have no idea why marble has weaknesses, but I think it sounds a lot better when you think that it's just appeared over time and marks where he had actually had his artery cut. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at 1916. That's why we're here today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the garrison that came up. So originally the garrison that left Liberty Hall was around 120 strong. And they left Liberty Hall and they marched up to St. Stephen's Green. They didn't initially come here to take this building. They came here to take the Green. So what would the Green have looked like when they came up here? So this is an image from, if you're standing with your back to Grafton Street. And as you can see, here's the college here. So the trams, which are currently being put back in, you can see they're running perfectly. And we're actually just there right in the middle. This one is taken from the Shelburne. So you can see your clear view straight over to the college is just there. So you see the difference in the height of the trees. This is taken in 1900, 1906 kind of time. So you can see how there could be bullet holes in the front of the college from the Shelburne. And then this is looking the other way. So this is from the college looking across the Green. And again, you can see the Shelburne pretty easily just there in the middle of the picture. So the garrison that came up, they were under the command of Commandant Michael Mallon, as you can see here on the left. And Mallon had served in the British Army. He'd served around 21 years in the British Army, and he'd served over in India. And while he was in India, he equated the plight of the native Indians over there being subjects to colonial power with the Irish people here. So when he came back in the early 1900s, he joined the Union, and he was a silk weaver, so he had a trade and everything. But he joined the Union here, and then in 1914, he joined the Irish Citizen Army. By 1915, he was second in command to James Connolly, so it was quite a meteoric rise through the ranks. But he had British military experience, so that was what stood to him when he was picked for the taking over of St. Stephen's Green. Now, another member of his garrison was this lady here, who I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard of before, Countess Markovic. She was from a Anglo-Irish family. The house, Lissadell House in Sligo, belonged to her family. And she was quite, and still is actually, quite a controversial figure in relation to Stephen's Green. She sometimes is called second in command, she sometimes isn't called second in command, so I'm just going to call her Countess Margaret, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But they came up and they decided, well, Malin decided that they'd take the Green. Now, what did they do when they got up to the Green? There was people in it, it was a lovely Easter weekend, so they emptied it out, they secured it, they locked the gates, and then they dug trenches. So this is actually taken from the British Library, from a newspaper from the 5th of May, 1916. So they dug these trenches, and as you probably would have noticed on the full-scale model in the front hall, we have a couple of trenches just up at the top of Dawson Street, just to give you an idea of where they were. Now, these would have been dug probably at the four corners of the Green, because this would have given you good control of any of the entry gates that you would have locked anyway, but just in case you had them blocked and under control at the Green. Now, the original plan wasn't just to take the Green, it was also to take strategic buildings around the Green. So this would have been buildings again on the four corners, because you would have had control of the main access routes into the Green. So Bagot Street, Leeston Street, Harcourt Street, that kind of thing. If you had the Green and buildings on those corners, you could control who came in and out. Just like in Mount Street Bridge, you didn't need a huge amount of people to control the British Army coming in and out of there. Other strategic buildings was the Shelbourne, they had a lot of food. The college here, because they would have had medical supplies and things like that. Now, unfortunately, they didn't have the numbers they thought they were going to have when they went up to the Green. Like I said, they only had around 120 at the time when they marched up. So it meant that the plan had to be changed, it had to be adapted. And what Malin decided to do was he decided he'd continue to take the Green, but he would have to leave the strategic buildings because he needed more people to take them. So once he had taken the Green, he did realise that there was probably going to be need for a retreat at some stage. So what he did on the Monday, he decided that he'd send a group over to the college here and see if they could gain access into the college. It was a good, sturdy building. It had very few windows, unlike the Shelbourne, so that if there was a lot of gunfire onto the front of the building, there wasn't a huge amount of glass falling in on top of people inside. So at the time, again, it was Easter holidays. There was no students here. The only staff member that was here was a man called James Duncan, and he was the college porter. So he lived here on site with his wife and his child, and they were the only people that were here over the Easter holidays. So on the Monday morning, James Duncan got a phone call from the registrar, and he said, look, there's stuff happening in Dublin, just make sure the doors and everything's locked and the college is secure. So Duncan said, that's fine, I'll do that. Now, the word eccentric has been used for the professor that lived around on York Street. The more I learn about this man, the more I think that was probably an understatement for him. He wrote over 3,000 pamphlets in his lifetime, and they included things on spontaneous combustion, bees, the circulation of blood, Nero, the Roman emperor. So you can see the wide variety of things that he liked to research and write on. And that man was called John Freeman Knott, and he was a professor here in the college. He lived on York Street, and every day he would come to the front of the college, knock on the front door, and he'd come in and continue the research on his many pamphlets that he was writing. So, what does he do on this particular day? On Monday, he decides that he'll come to the front of the college, as he usually did, knock on the front door, and come in and continue his research. This is a petition that was written by James Duncan after the Rising. So we have an eyewitness account of what actually happened. And as you can see here, it says, the petitioner, who's Duncan, observes from his bedroom window the college Dr. Knott, a fellow of the college, who was in the habit of arriving every day, coming to the college door, at which he knocked, and the petitioner opened the door slightly, telling Knott at the same time that the college was closed for the day. So he was subtly telling Knott that the college was closed, but I'm sure he also made him aware of the revolution that was going on behind him in the Green, which obviously Knott was too focused on his research and didn't notice when he walked around the corner. But then the petitioner, James Duncan, does say that he tried to close the door, but before he could, Countess Markovic and two other rebels presented themselves, one of the rebels firing at close range a rifle at the petitioner. The shot broke the glass. They then forced their way in, the Countess Markovic covering your petitioner with a revolver, saying at the same time, "Where is the roof? And also, if you hesitate, I will shoot you dead." And that's how they got into the college. So the same way that yous came into the college this evening, that's how the rebels got into the college in 1916. So once they were in the college, they secured it. They made sure that they had complete control, and they did go to the roof to make sure that they could have good eyeline or good eyesight across the green. Now at this time, it's still Monday. Malin and the rest of the garrison are still in the green, and they decide they bed down for the night. They have dug their trenches. They're going to stay there. But unknown to them, Monday night into Tuesday morning, the British Army bring a machine gun up to the 4th floor of the Shelburne. And early Tuesday morning, they open fire on them in the green. Now, as you can imagine, the trees aren't as high. You've now dug a hole that you're sitting in the green, and a machine gun has opened fire on you. So it's not a very good place to be. So Malin was very good in thinking that he'd need a retreat, because as soon as that started to happen, he had to retreat all of his garrison out of the green. They were unsafe. It was too much of a dangerous site to stay in. So by Tuesday afternoon, they had actually all made their way to the gatekeeper's lodge at the very corner of Stephen's Green and Harcourt Street, and gradually come into the college, and they were all safe in here in a secure building by early afternoon on Tuesday. And what did they do when they were in here? Now, we've good evidence of what they did when they were in here, and through photos, we know that they barricaded the windows, they barricaded doors. They did leave access to one door that they would have, that people could come to, as long as they had the right password, they'd be allowed in and out. So this is one of the doors that we have photos of barricaded. This is another door that was barricaded as well. We also have great descriptions from newspapers of what happened in here. And as we know, newspapers aren't sensationalist in any kind of way. So when they describe where the women stayed when they were in the college, we can see here the caretakers' rooms, we're up here at the top. The caretakers' rooms were reserved as bedrooms for the female invaders. It was here that Countess Markovic slept, and she and others seem to have had a partiality for chocolates and other similar articles, as many broken packages of sweetstuffs were being left behind. Now, if you want to take into account that this is a college at the time, the only real living quarters were the caretakers or college porters, as this is. So there wasn't a huge amount of food. You've got over 100 people in here. Your nearest garrison is Jacob's Biscuit Factory. So if you can go there and get any food, be it sweetstuffs or chocolates or whatever you can get, you're going to bring back and eat. So I always think that's quite funny. It makes it sound like they were having a lovely tea party with nice sweets while they were here, which is not the case at all. But it also shows us other things, is why it's a bit of an odd thing that they used the chemical lecture theatre as a kind of morgue space. Yet you're in a college which has an anatomy department. So it's a bit of an odd one to think that they would kind of change around things as well. But this is where these kind of archival material gives us great idea into what actually happened, instead of presuming that they used the facilities in the way that the facilities are here. So another photo that we have is of the college hall upstairs. So if you went upstairs to the exhibition, this is the same room. It's a bit tidier obviously now, but it's the exact same room. I'd say the only thing that's changed is the paint, and that's it. And this was used by the men to sleep in. And the reason for that is, I don't know if you've noticed, when you're outside the front of the college and you look up, if you're standing and you've got York Street on your left, the first 3 windows are the boardroom windows, and they're real. The next 3 windows are fake windows, and they lead into this room. And then you've got another real one at the very end near Glover's Alley. Now, the reason that was always built like that, when the extension was built in 1825, those fake windows were put in because this was originally a museum, this room. But it also meant for the rebels that were in the college, there was no direct line of fire into this room, so it was a very safe room. So that's why it was chosen as a place of rest. It was also chosen as a place to keep your first aid station. So behind that screen there, on the stage upstairs, is where they put up and set up their first aid station. So anyone that became injured or was anyway wounded over the week that they were in the college, this is where they were treated. So now that we've had a look at what the rebels were doing when they were in the college, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a quick look at what the surgeons and what was happening in the hospitals around Dublin at the same time. So here we have a map. I know the writing is quite small, but I couldn't really make it any bigger. So here we have Stephen's Green Theatre. So the college is just there. You've got Richmond Hospital, you've got the Knightsbridge railway station, which is Houston Station now. You've got the Coombe Hospital, and you've also got Mount Street Bridge, which is kind of out this direction here. So you can see that, just to give you an idea of whereabouts the different main points of the rising were. Now, as you can imagine, at this time, we're in 1916, so we're slap bang in the middle of World War I. Now, Dublin was having warships arrive back from the front full of casualties that were being brought to the various hospitals in Dublin. So the hospitals in Dublin at this particular time were quite full, and they were full of wounded Irish and British soldiers, because both were in the army fighting in World War I. So the staff in these hospitals were quite busy at that time anyway. But because of the rising, what ends up happening is access into the city becomes near on impossible. So any staff that are in the city end up shouldering the responsibility of treating not only the wounded soldiers that are there from the front, but also the soldiers, the rebels, and the civilians that are being wounded during the week of Easter Rising as well. And these men and women worked tirelessly to continue this, some catching a couple of hours sleep a night, that's it, because again, they had no relief coming in to them from outside of Dublin. And as you can imagine, it could have been quite difficult for some of the medical staff to treat rebels or soldiers, depending on their political beliefs, depending on their families. Families might have been out in the front, families might have been in the GPO. You've no idea. But the one thing about medical staff, and it's still the same today, it doesn't matter which side you're on. When you come into a hospital injured, they're going to treat you. Now, there's one guy I'm going to look at now, and this man in particular, I think probably had a bit of sorrow around the rising and what was happening. And his name was Lieutenant Colonel Richard Francis Tobin. So as you can guess, he was a British Army surgeon. His only son had gone to Gallipoli and had been killed in 1915. Now, he had served nearly 30 years in the British Army as a surgeon, and he'd retired to the position of surgeon in Vincent's-on-the-Green, so just literally across the green from us. And he was on duty in Easter week 1916. And as you can see there from the quote from one of his colleagues in the hospital at the time, Dr. Louis Courtney, he says, although he, Tobin, couldn't understand the situation and didn't approve of it, he would still take his hat off. So he still respected anyone who would take up a gun in one hand and his life in the other to stand out for his principles. His own son had done the same. So he could respect it, but he couldn't understand why they would do this in the middle of Dublin. Now, Tobin was working away, treating anyone left, right and centre that came into Vincent's. He was later called to Dublin Castle because of his expertise, and it was in Dublin Castle that he treated James Connolly. So you can imagine the British Army officer and the revolutionary talking to each other side by side at the bed. And they actually struck up quite a strong friendship in that brief period that they knew each other. And that friendship continued afterwards, even after James Connolly's execution. And Tobin, along with a number of others, gave financial support to the education of Connolly's children. So you've got Nora, Maura, and Roddy, his only son. And Roddy continues to call to Tobin in his house in Wicklow up until Tobin's death in 1919. So you can see this kind of, it's not very black and white. You're not one side or the other. There's this very entwined linking of these lives in Dublin at the time. Now, this guy I find particularly amusing. The next guy, he worked along with Tobin, and that's a man called John Stephen McArdle. Now, this guy was an avowed nationalist. In 1900, when Queen Victoria came to visit Ireland, he flew black flags out of the windows of his house. So he was kind of stating what side he was on. And he worked alongside Tobin in Vincent's. And he then moved, not long after 1900, to 72 Merrion Square. And I'd recommend, just if you're ever going for a walk around Merrion Square, find 72 and have a look at the steps. Because he took out the steps and he replaced them with marble. And Dubliners, doing what only Dubliners can, decided that they'd call him Johnny McMarble from then on instead of Johnny McArdle. And the steps are still there today. I just go and have a look, and when you see them, it gives you a little chuckle when you think about it. But he was well known around Dublin. He waived his fees numerous times to help anyone that he could. he also gave a lot of his free time to the children's hospitals in Dublin. So he was very well liked and very well known. And in 1914, he was at a National Volunteers Parade in Wicklow, and he actually addressed the parade, and he said to them, if they had to leave the path of peace to defend Ireland, he, McArdle, would not be there as their friend merely, but he hoped he would be here as one of the rank and file of the army that they started for the defence of their country. So he was very much putting his beliefs right out there when he was addressing the parade. And to the point where, when he died in 1928, the Free State government sent a plane to do a circle of honour over his funeral while he was being buried. So you can see that he was held in such high regard by not only the rebels at the time, but continued on into the Free State government as well. Now, during the Rising, the British Army had issued orders that anyone that came in that people or medical staff or hospital staff thought was involved in the Rising, they should be noted and they should be detained, and then they would be arrested. Now, it's amazing when you look at hospital registers how very few people actually have gunshot wounds. They seem to have many other ailments that happened just in that week. And I'll give you an example of one, which I find quite funny, which is the next one. And that was because the next guy I'm going to talk about, I'm sure you would have seen him upstairs. He's another surgeon, another rebel. And that's him there, Sir Thomas Miles is his name. Now, he was a home ruler, so he did believe in the idea of Ireland having some kind of governance, but he believed in it politically. So he was president here in 1900, and in 1914, along with Erskine Childers, he ran guns in on his yacht. So he ran them into Kilcool and Wicklow, and his kind of liaison in that was a man called Captain Eamon Martin. So when he ran the guns in 1914, 3 days later, World War I was declared. And Thomas Miles was made consulting surgeon to the British forces in Ireland by the King of England. So as you can see, again, not very black and white, quite grey. We're all kind of linking in here. So during the Rising, Miles was actually on the hospital staff in Richmond. So you can see him here sitting in the middle. And there's a number of there's Woods there, and there's a couple of other guys that actually feature upstairs as well. So it's like surgeons today. They don't just work in one hospital. They're usually kind of in a number of different hospitals or teaching and stuff like that. So at the time, Miles was mainly based in Richmond. And when he was there, I wouldn't be able to even comprehend what it would be like to be working in a hospital and having to treat people that are coming in wounded from war, from battle. But imagine if one of them was your friend. So when he was working in Richmond, a man came in with gunshot wounds to his chest, and that was Eamon Martin, the man that he had befriended doing the gun running in Kilcool. Now, Martin was an Irish volunteer. He was a captain, and he got shot out near kind of Phoenix Park area and was brought to the Richmond Hospital, and Miles was the one who took him under his care to treat him. Now, what I like about this is Eamon Martin writes later that Miles obviously knew him, but he kept calling him Adrian. So Eamon was thinking this must have been his way of deflecting the records knowing Eamon's real name. Because if they knew Eamon Martin's real name, they would have known he was a volunteer, which would have meant he was detained, which meant he was in danger. So he continuously calls him Adrian for the whole time he's there. But then what happens is a lot of people, like a huge amount of death sentences were passed during the Rising. As we know, not all of them were carried out. But the kind of reporting of these death sentences starts to come in, and Miles fears for Martin's life. So what he decides to do is he dresses Martin up in a uniform. He dresses himself in his Royal Army medical uniform, and he puts Martin and himself into his chauffeur-driven car, no less. And they drive out to Blackrock, and he leaves Martin out there in the Linden convalescent home in Blackrock, where he can actually recover from his wounds. He then organises for Martin to get a travel pass for the TB that he has in his lungs to go to California, because the Californian air would be better for that kind of ailment that he has. So again, you can see this whole kind of, I suppose you're trying to preserve life. You don't want to hand over people that you know could be executed. So in that particular case, I think Miles is a great example. He is a home ruler. He runs in guns. He's then made a knight, and he's given medals by the British government and everything. But you can see where all of these lives are interlinked and connected. Now, as we know, rebels, soldiers and civilians alike were killed during the Rising. So were medical staff and surgeons. And the one I want to talk to you just briefly about is this guy here, and I love the stance. Stand there, so chest out. Oh, he's full of himself there. But this is Charles Hachette Hyland, and he graduated from here with a license in dental surgery. So that's when the college still had a dental school here. So he graduated from here in 1907, and he's living in 1916 at Percy Place, so just out near Mount Street Bridge, with his wife and his child. And when the rising starts, he sends his wife and his child out of the city for safety, but he decides he'd stay. And what he does is, through the first few days of the rising, he puts on his white coat and he goes out onto Mount Street Bridge, and he tends to anyone that he can find. So that's soldiers, rebels, civilians, whoever he finds there, he helps. And he also tries to get as many of them back to Sir Patrick Dunn's, which is near to Mount Street, for further treatment and everything. Now, unfortunately, on Thursday, the 27th of April, Charles is shot and he's killed while trying to help people. And that's his memorial in St. Mary's Church on Haddington Road. So you can see where, even though Mount Street Bridge was the worst battle of the 1916 Rising for the amount of deaths and casualties, yet Charles was willing to run out and help anyone that he could. Unfortunately, he paid for it with his life. But while all this is happening around the college, and all the hospitals are being filled with different casualties, what's actually happening in the college? So here we have just a photo of what the college began to look like. It started to get obviously riddled with machine gun fire across the front of it. Even though the windows are fake, they still had panes of glass in them. So those two above the door and just to the right, 1 and 2, they are actually those fake windows into College Hall. So the building was getting absolutely covered in bullets, but inside the garrison was fairly secure. They were fairly isolated as well. So they did sustain casualties, they did have injuries, and one of the I suppose the biggest casualties was this guy, this man, Michael O'Doherty. According to the Bureau of Military History witness statements, Michael O'Doherty was on the roof with another number of other rebels, and he decided he was going to eat a sandwich. So he sat up and then got hit 12 times by a machine gun round. Now, he was taken down off the roof of the college, and again he was brought to the first aid station in College Hall, and they tried to do their best to keep him alive. Now, the Dublin Fire Brigade somehow got word that this guy had been very badly injured, and they appear at York Street door. And this here on the far right is their fire brigade log, and I would advise anyone to, it's in the Dublin City Public Library down on Pearse Street, but they've also digitised it, so if you want to go online you can go through it. And it's here that we have Michael O'Doherty's entry. So we have Michael O'Doherty, gives it his address, bullet wounds in body and head, brought to Mercer's. So they take him from here and they bring him to Mercer's Hospital, but then they quickly move him from Mercer's to Dublin Castle, I can only presume because of his injuries. And who might be there to treat him but Tobin, because Tobin's there treating James Connolly. So it's another kind of weird Irish link, I suppose, that we know and see people all over the world that we can relate to. But that's just one of the injuries here. Another one, and Michael O'Doherty lives. That's the amazing thing. He lives, he loses an eye and the use of one of his arms. But 3 months after that, he's still sent to Frongok because he was still involved in the rising. So he goes and he spends his time in Frongok, and then in 1918 he's actually back in Dublin again. So it's amazing to think that he survived such horrific injuries. Now, obviously his health was depleted, but he still survived. Another casualty that was here in the college is this lady, which I'm sure you've probably heard a lot about as well, Margaret Skinner. She was from Glasgow. She was quite an excellent sniper shot, and if you read her book, Doing My Bit for Ireland, she has no qualms about saying when she took aim, people fell. So I'm not going to question her. But she's in the college, and she and a small group decided that they'd go up Harcourt Street and try and take out a couple of British Army snipers that are up there. But on their way, Fred Ryan gets shot and killed instantly, and Margaret gets shot a number of times. Now, this is Wednesday, so we're kind of in the middle of the week. She gets shot a number of times, and she's brought back to the college. And again, she's treated here behind the first aid station. So upstairs, where you could see, we kind of tried to do our best to recreate what it would have looked like using material from the time. So the instruments that you see up there are World War I instruments. So they were the nearest that we could get. The anatomy trolley was used up until the 1960s here, even though it's from the 1860s. So again, we're looking at it in and around the same time. But she was treated there, no anaesthetic. And whatever first aid instruments they had with them and they could find here, that's what they used. She stayed there from Wednesday until the garrison finally surrendered on Sunday. So quite a hardy lady that she was able to stay and able to, they were and quite well-trained first aiders for the Irish, or for the rebels, to be able to keep her alive for that amount of time. And again, when the garrison surrendered here on the Sunday, she was the only one that wasn't arrested. She was taken to Vincent's across the green because of her injuries, because she needed surgical help. And again, who do we have in Vincent's but Johnny McArdle, who could have been there to say hello to her, and I think he would have given her preferential treatment. But when the garrison do surrender here, even though technically the rising is over and the rebels are sent to the various prisons around England and including Frongoch, the surgeons' work continues. There's still wounded civilians, soldiers and rebels. And one man's work who continues is this man. So this is Sir Charles Cameron. And as you can see, he was Public Health Officer of Dublin at the time in 1916. He was also 86. So he had been Public Health Officer for, I think at that stage, nearly 50 years. He had received the freedom of the city in 1910 because of the amazing work he'd done to try and improve sanitation and public health within Dublin City. Now what he does is, as part of his duties as Public Health Officer, he goes to Frongoch and he inspects the conditions that the internees are kept in. And we actually have an internee that was there at the time, a man called J. Brennan Whitmore, wrote a book when he came back. And in it he says, "We did not see Sir Charles Cameron's report, but we were told on very good authority that it was almost wholly in favour of the prisoners." So Cameron condemned the conditions that they were kept in over there. And the conditions did change, and there was also kind of an early release in the amnesties. So this is what the internees felt, that Charles had done his best by going over and doing his job of inspecting and then condemning the conditions in Frongoch. Now Cameron also then, after the rising, had to face the task of Spanish flu in Dublin. And as you can see there from the numbers, this 1918 into 1919, this huge amounts of people are getting Spanish flu and dying in Dublin. And unfortunately, one of those is Michael O'Doherty. So the man who survived the 12 machine gun bullets comes back to Dublin, and because his health has been so impaired by what he's gone through, and I'm sure going after 3 months to Frongoch to not the best kind of recovery conditions, when he came back to Dublin, he eventually died in 1918, which I think is a huge pity considering he'd survived the rising and such horrific wounds. But as I've said, like the battle for the Republic continues, and Thomas Miles reappears again, and he reappears because his expertise is needed in the inquest into Thomas Ashe's death. So Thomas Ashe, who you see here on the right, he actually went on hunger strike and died in September 1917 in Kilmainham. And Miles damns the conditions and the actions of those in charge in Kilmainham. And as you can see here, this is from a Bureau of Military History witness statement, which was taken recording what Miles said at the inquest. And as you can see there, he says, "Ashe's death was caused by punishment of taking away from his cell the bed, bedding and boots, and is being left to lie on the cold floor for 50 hours, and then subjected to forcible feeding in his weak condition after a hunger strike of 5 or 6 days." So Miles isn't holding back. You know, this was a terrible, horrific thing for Ashe to have gone through, and he is stating to the record that it was done absolutely against what surgeons and medical staff would stand and strive for. Now, there is seeds of hope in this time as well. There are horrific things like this, but there is one, and one that's particularly linked to the college, and it comes in the form of this lovely lady here. This is Moira Connolly. Now, as I mentioned earlier, James Connolly had Nora, Moira and Roddy. This certificate here is Moira's preliminary examination certificate that she passed to enter as a student here in 1919. So she actually comes to the college and gets her license and receives her license in 1924 from here. So I think in some kind of roundabout way, between Tobin knowing her father and then helping with the education of the children and then her coming here, it is some kind of hope for her and for the rebels at the time that things can still continue, things are looking better. They're looking better, you know. So again, now we're into kind of looking at Civil War time now. That was 1919 when Moira joined the college here. And during the Civil War, again, the lives of surgeons and rebels, they're still entwined. You're still fighting for the Republic. And I think there's no better example than on the 23rd of August 1922 when Michael Collins is shot down in Cork. He's brought up here to Dublin to be embalmed, and it's a friend of his who actually does the embalming, and he was Dr. Oliver St. John Doherty. Now, I'm sure loads of people know the name of the pub in Temple Bar, but he was more than that. He was a surgeon, he was a poet, he was a playwright, he won many awards when he was a student in Trinity, and he was also a fellow of the college here. He was awarded as a fellowship in 1910. As I said, he was a close friend of Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith, and his house on Ely Place, again, just the other side of the green, was used as a safe house many times by Collins and others during the War of Independence. So when Michael Collins' body is brought up to Dublin, Doherty comes to the college here in the middle of the night to use the facilities here to embalm Michael Collins. And the story has it that he comes to the side door and knocks on the side door to gain entry to the anatomy theatre. There's no answer, but a bullet hits the door just above his head. So he decides he better hot-foot it over to Vincent's where he can actually get in. And that's where the embalming takes place. And this is an image of Michael Collins leaving Vincent's after Doherty has carried out the embalming. Now, Doherty was, like I said, a poet, a playwright. He was also a politician as well. And he is when it comes to the Free State, he is a Free State senator. And he gets kidnapped in 1923 by anti-treaty because he is pro-treaty. And amazingly, he escapes by jumping through a window into the Liffey. And he swims up the Liffey, which even that alone, how he escaped that, I don't know. But in gratitude to the Liffey, he actually released 2 swans. And as you can see, here's the photo of him here, gladly releasing 2 swans onto the Liffey in 1924. And that's a painting of Doherty just up there on your right. So, as you can see, the lives of surgeons and rebels are constantly entwined. Surgeons are forever fighting to try and keep the wounded alive, be they rebels, British Army soldiers, civilians, whoever it is. And I think this is particularly highlighted in this slide and the one to follow. These are patient registers from the Charitable Infirmary Charitable Trust, which would be was Jervis Street Hospital. And as you can see here, these are the names of people that were admitted to the hospital. Here is their address. Now, my apologies if it's not too clear, but I'll tell you, in some of the addresses you have 101 Battalion, you've got Dublin Guards, you've got Beggar's Bush. So you've got a number of, obviously, soldiers, and this is in the time of the Civil War. So you'd be Free State soldiers that you'd have. Here we have the different ailments that happened, that brought people in. You've got things like shell shock, so you're probably looking at someone that was back from World War I at that stage and still had shell shock. You've got gunshot wounds, GSW, which is gunshot wound to the right foot. You've also got bullet to the right thigh, bullet wound to the right cheek. So you can see that this is in the middle of the Civil War. There's injuries coming in from left, right and centre to Jervis Street. But what I want to show is that particularly highlights, it doesn't matter what side or religion or whatever you are when you come into a hospital. If you have a gunshot wound, you will be treated. And you can see this here. FSA means Free State Army. But then down here you've got IRA. So these are being brought in at the same time to be treated the exact same in Jervis Street. And so what I was trying to do in this talk was just to highlight, obviously, the role of surgeons, being an RCSI archivist, to highlight the role of surgeons in the rising, or in the fight for the Republic, but also the rebels. Like, the rebels were putting not only their beliefs but their lives on the line to try and secure a republic for Ireland. And in doing that, the surgeons were then trying to treat them and keep them alive, to either go on and fight another day or go on and fight politically to get that republic. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to end on a quote from a surgeon, and this is William Ireland de Courcy Wheeler. So William Ireland de Courcy Wheeler was a surgeon. He was working in 1916 around in Mercer's. So again, he would have been dealing with a lot of casualties that came in. In a weird twist of fate, when Malin and the garrison here surrendered, they actually handed their surrender to Major Henry de Courcy Wheeler, which was William Ireland's brother. And an even weirder twist of fate, Henry de Courcy Wheeler was related to marriage by Markovic. So you can see how all of these lives are very much entwined at the time. And I'm just going to read the quote to you from William Ireland de Courcy Wheeler, because I think it kind of sums up the role played by surgeons in the battle for the Republic, and in today's battle, war zones today. It doesn't matter where the injured lie, they will go and do their best to help them. So this is taken from William Ireland de Courcy Wheeler in 1923. And he says, it was no light matter to travel over roads strewn with mines and explosives at the dead of night. It was not a joyride to go through ambushes and trenches of necessity by forbidden routes. But there was never an instance of refusal to attend a patient, especially a poor patient. The general practitioner in Ireland will merit an honoured place when the dreadful times through which this country has passed have been chronicled by the future historian. And on that note, I say thank you very much.